This is East Asia Tonight.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Jill Newbronner, and here are tonight's top stories. Myanmar extends its state of emergency by 6 months as the military government fights rebels on multiple fronts. Could its main benefactor, China's behind-the-scene pressure, lead to any change? U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken at a lecture in Singapore says Washington wants to ensure competition doesn't veer into conflict as it manages its relations with Beijing. Countries condemned the killing of Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh in an airstrike on Tehran just hours after he attended the new president's inauguration. Bank of Japan making an unexpected move to raise interest rates for the second time in almost 2 decades. Governor Kazuo Ueda assures that the move will not seriously damage Japan's economy. Ahead on East Asia Tonight, Thailand leading the charge to become Southeast Asia's premier electric vehicle production hub, with major Chinese EV player BYD investing heavily. Could the move come at a cost to traditional car makers? We speak to our correspondent. Myanmar's state of emergency, which was imposed since the 2021 coup, has been extended by another 6 months. This is the 6th such extension and comes amid reports that China had wanted military chief Min Aung Hlaing to hand over power to an interim government. Now, China is Myanmar's most important trade partner and benefactor. It's been widely expected that the army chief will want to continue holding on to power. Earlier, Min Aung Hlaing chaired the country's highest security body, known as the National Defence Security Council, which decides on such matters. Now, in the past, the NDSC usually takes around half an hour to announce its decision. This time round, it took nearly 5 minutes under Min Aung Hlaing, who now has the power to call for such meetings since he took on the role of acting president earlier this month. Now, sources told CNA earlier that China's top diplomat Wang Yi asked Myanmar's ex-president Thein Sein to persuade Army Chief Min Aung Hlaing to hand over power and form an interim government. Nikkei Asia later quoted sources saying Wang Yi had asked if Thein Sein would consider being an interim leader. But this latest move means Min Aung Hlaing will have to have at least 6 more months in power before he plans his next move. Now, to make sense of this all, we have our Myanmar correspondent Leong Wai-Kit joining us in the studio to unpack the issues. Wai-Kit, first of all, China, as we heard there, reportedly weighing in on Myanmar's leadership transition, but the army chief, as we saw there, has gone a different direction. So I'm wondering, what does this tell us about Min Aung Hlaing's strategic thinking?
I think the simple answer, Jill, is survival. I mean, on the one hand, you have the China factor, your biggest ally, and your biggest ally who has reportedly wanted Min Aung Hlaing to hand over power. But in front of his eyes, it's very obvious that it is survival, because sources close to the military told me that this is a man who has obviously many enemies. The resistance forces is one, and within its own ranks, he has his own fears. I'm told that Min Aung Hlaing now has trouble sleeping at night. This is a man who is paranoid. This is a man who keeps watching behind his shoulders. Otherwise, he would not have put former President Thein Sein under close surveillance after he came back from China, because he's afraid that whomever Thein Sein speaks to might threaten his power. Now, that's according to my source. He's also moved his people around over the years, jailing some of them. He even has trouble trusting his number 2 at one point, So Win. So this is a man who has trust issues. Very clearly to him, it's survival. At the same time, we need to see in the next few days whether the Myanmar army might come up with some surprises that might placate China, because we still know that Min Aung Hlaing wants to please China. He wants to visit Beijing, but sources told me that if he does not have a concrete timeline for elections or some form of transition plan, he's never going to get the invitation. So we'll wait and see whether in the next few days he does come up with something new.
Well, you bring up an interesting point, because how would you then characterize the China-Myanmar relations today? Traditionally brother-brother, or now, as we're seeing, discontent creeping in? And that's important to know because it's going to inform the next leadership.
Exactly. Now, observers from China see Myanmar in two lights. One, that the SAC, which the junta leadership calls itself, that the SAC is failing. Yet, China has to recognize that the SAC are the de facto leaders because they sit in Naypyidaw. The very fact that China reportedly still sells arms to Myanmar shows that it is not giving up on Myanmar. The fact that it invites its junta-appointed ministers to China for multilateral meetings also shows that there is this closeness. Yet, China is increasingly vocal. I mean, it has issues with Myanmar for not being able to tackle your online scam syndicates near your borders. And as we speak, there is this ongoing clash at a key trading town of Leisure that's also ongoing. So the relations on the surface is that we're still allies. We're still strong in relations, but there are some things that Myanmar may or may not do that may displease China further.
Right, but the fact is, China is the most influential country, as you mentioned. And as they make this little pressure points on Myanmar, do you think that this is the right platform, the right opportunity for perhaps ASEAN to come in and step in to piggyback on this momentum with China trying to push for Min Aung Hlaing to resolve the crisis?
You know, Jill, this is one question I've been asking diplomats and ministers. On the surface, neither of these parties, China or ASEAN, will openly say we want to exert any form of external influence. But offline, things might be already kicking in because just recently, Malaysia at the ASEAN ministers meeting talked about elections in Myanmar. There was also talk about making the Troika mechanism less rigid. Troika mechanism is a setup where you involve your past, present and future ASEAN chairs to discuss Myanmar. They want to make it more flexible, which could possibly mean you can have even more parties, China even, if the conditions are right. But things are in motion for ASEAN to make full use of all the strings it can pull to push the needle on Myanmar.
We will see if that needle moves. I appreciate your input today. Our correspondent Leong Wai-kit joining us in the studio. Tensions flaring up in the Middle East after Hamas confirmed its political leader, Ismail Haniyeh, has been killed in an attack in Tehran. Now, Iran's Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei says avenging his killing is Tehran's duty because it took place in the country's capital. Haniyeh was in Tehran to attend the inauguration of the president of Iran, Hamas's main backer. Now, he died in an early morning airstrike at a special residence for war veterans. Haniyeh has been the face of Hamas's international diplomacy since war with Israel erupted last October. His death sparked strong condemnation, including from China.
我们高度关注有关事件，坚决反对并谴责暗杀行为，对这一事件可能导致地区局势进一步动荡深感忧虑。中方一贯主张通过谈判对话解决地区争端，加沙应尽快实现 全面永久停火，避免冲突对抗进一步升级。
Russia says Haniyeh's killing is a political assassination and will lead to a further escalation of tensions. U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin says Washington is working to ease tensions in the Middle East, and he does not think a wider war in the region is inevitable. But he vowed that the U.S. would help Israel defend Israel if it came under attack. Well, for more now, let's join Sarah Coates live from Tel Aviv. Sarah, first, what's been Israel's response to the death of Hamas's political chair?
Still no claim of responsibility from Israel, although we have heard from the Defence Minister Yoav Gallant. He came out a little while ago to say that Israel doesn't want a war, but it is prepared for one. Now, we also need to mention that on Facebook, the Israeli government press office, it has posted an image of Ismail Haniyeh with a stamp across his forehead that says eliminated. Now, we do know that the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, he will convene a security cabinet meeting in the coming hours. Amid these real threats, these real fears that this could potentially be the trigger that puts the region into an all-out war. So this is, of course, very, very concerning. But in terms of what's happening here on the ground, it really is business as usual. The IDF's Homefront Command has come out to say that right now there are no changes to its directorate to the Israeli public. It will update people if indeed anything does change. But really the only main thing that we can tell you is that there's airspace about an hour this way north of where I'm standing. That has now been closed, but we are expecting the Israeli military to potentially reopen that at the end of the day. But of course, in saying that, things can change very, very rapidly.
Sarah, there's always been a parallel track that we follow, and that is the ceasefire negotiations. How will this impact that?
This is going to have a major impact on these hostage and ceasefire negotiations, given really that Ismail Haniyeh, the head of Hamas's Politburo, was one of the ones negotiating all of this, because we do need to remember that the head of Hamas, Yahya Sinwar, he's believed to be hiding deep underground inside Gaza in this labyrinth of tunnels. Now, we do know that the funeral of this man, Ismail Haniyeh, will be held tomorrow in Tehran. His body will then be transferred to Doha, and 3 days of mourning has been declared. But really what it means on the ground in terms of impact is that this ceasefire and hostage deal, which has been in the works for months and months, really bearing absolutely no fruit, it looks like that this could be now dead in the water, and that the war in Gaza will continue. And it is, of course, very, very worrying for the region, given what we saw last night in Beirut, Israel claiming to have killed this senior Hezbollah commander in that strike. So, of course, we can expect very high-level meetings right around the region to be happening today as world leaders and, of course, here in Israel assess this security situation.
All right, Sarah, thanks. Reporting live there that any ceasefire deal seems to be as far away as ever. Well, coming up on East Asia tonight, the Bank of Japan raises interest rates in a surprise move. We'll examine the repercussions for the domestic and global economy with our special guest, Norihiro Yamaguchi.
Young people in Japan are lonelier than ever.
自殺の数が増えるとか、不登校のや DV の数が増えるなどの様々な数字の悪化が見られました。
What is behind this social isolation?
家帰ってからもなんかもう一点をずっと見つめるみたいな。
You keep having this sense that you do not belong to the society.
Young and lonely in Japan. Insight, Thursday on CNA.
I needed some help. Good thing I knew someone. Or something.
Glad you called, Jay. It's time for an upgrade.
Awesome. I knew what I had to do. Because they never stop. No time to waste. This isn't sci-fi. This is precision AI.
Dihua Street is the beginning of Taiwan tea industry.
From a place that used to be trading tea, rice, and herbs, it now has so many more new things to offer.
我们就发起了这样的一个活动，希望呢他们能够来这边一边攀岩的时候呢，他们就会彼此的互相的认识。
Yes!
I think I fall in love with this place.
Congratulations, CNA, on 25 good years. Thank you for being through the highs and lows in life with us.
In China, city life is losing its allure. 你在外面的话，你可能比你优秀的人太多了，但是你回到乡村，其实哪怕你有一点点优点，你都能被放大。
China's youth are ditching prestigious careers in the city to pursue new potential in remote hinterlands.
其实这边的生活水准整体来说已经很高，你可以用一种新的眼光来看待这些大城市周边的非常发达的乡村，在这里去实现一些你的想法。
我去离职了，互联网太成熟，没什么东西可以做。我就在农业里面，我觉得它像一个白纸，可以创造一些东西。
Wastelands once abandoned have been transformed into thriving assets.
那个时候就每天就跟个做梦一样。大概2个月的时间，让我们挣到了100多万。
Watch Young and Rural in China on demand at cna.asia.
Secretary of State Antony Blinken says the United States is stepping up its Asia-Pacific alliances and strengthening the multilateral system because these arrangements, quote, are fit for purpose. He was speaking at a U.S. embassy event in Singapore where he talked about the value of American leadership.
There are two things that I think motivate us profoundly. One is that there is a premium, I think, on American engagement, American leadership. Certainly it's one that makes sense for us, but I also believe it makes sense for countries around the world. If we're not engaged, if we're not leading, then probably someone else is, and maybe not in a way that advances the interests and values that we have and that we share with Singapore. Maybe just as bad no one is, and then you're going to have a vacuum that's filled by bad things before it's likely filled by good things.
In that conversation, Mr. Blinken also talked about the United States' relationship with China, which he said was the most complicated and consequential in the world.
There's an obligation that we have, and that is to make sure that we're managing that relationship responsibly. We're in a competition, and by the way, there's nothing wrong with competition. In fact, in our system, competition's a good thing. As long as it's fair, as long as it's on a level playing field, it's a good thing. It hopefully brings out the best in everyone. We want to make sure that that competition doesn't veer into conflict, which is profoundly not in our interest or anyone else's, nor in China's. And that starts with communicating. It starts with being able to speak clearly, directly, and frequently to each other.
Mr. Blinken said the U.S. and China militaries are in contact at all levels to make sure there are no misunderstandings that could flare up. The U.S. diplomat is in Singapore, part of a 10-day Asia tour. You remember he pledged $500 million to the Philippine military in Manila yesterday, shortly after upgrading America's military command structure in Japan on Sunday. Well, earlier today, Mr. Blinken and Singapore Foreign Minister Vivian Balakrishnan signed a nuclear energy deal that will give Singapore access to American nuclear energy technologies and expertise. Singapore relies on oil and natural gas and is looking at options like nuclear to meet the target of net zero carbon emissions by 2050. The agreement is expected to start by the end of 2024 and last 30 years. The US has similar agreements with 22 other countries, including China, Indonesia, and the Philippines. Now, this is where we hand over the time to Olivia Mazuki from CNA's Business Desk with that big story out of Japan. Olivia.
That's right, Jill, and it is among the most hawkish moves out of the BOJ. And while a rate hike was well telegraphed, it still comes as a surprise that the BOJ actually delivered on it. The Bank of Japan has raised its benchmark interest rate and slowed its bond buying program in an unexpected move as the country tackles a weakening currency and rising prices. Governor Kazuo Ueda says the decision was made to ensure inflation will stay within its 2% target and will not harm the Japanese economy significantly.
金利の水準、あるいは実質金利で見れば非常に低い水準での、少しの調整ということですので、景気に大きなマイナスの影響を与えるということではないというふうに思っております。
The decision defied dominant market expectations for the BOJ to stand pat on rates. It takes its short-term policy rate to around 0.25%, a level unseen since 2008. The central bank also announced cutting bond buying in half over the next 2 years to roughly $19.6 billion. The BOJ says it would continue raising rates if economic conditions develop in line with its forecast. Well, money markets reacted positively to the latest BOJ moves. The benchmark Nikkei and the broader topics boosted by gains in banking stocks. Higher rate environment is seen positive for banks' profits. The yen, though, rallied to touch 150 level against the dollar at one point, its highest since the start of July. And it comes as the U.S. Federal Reserve looks increasingly set on cutting interest rates, reversing an aggressive tightening cycle, which led to a higher dollar and yet a painful yen sell-off for Japan. Well, for a deep dive into the BOJ's latest decision and its economic impact, we're joined now by Norihiro Yamaguchi, senior economist at Oxford Economics, joining us from Tokyo. Thank you, Norihiro, for your time. We hear a hawkish message today by the BOJ with the rate hike and also plans to trim its bond buying. And the question is, what does it mean for the domestic economy, given the weakness in consumer spending and higher costs that businesses are already facing?
Yeah, thank you for inviting me. And I personally agree with Governor Ueda in that this one hike will not affect the economy by a lot. After all, it's just a 25 BPS rate hike, and it won't impact the household a lot. And at the same time, as you mentioned, the households have been suffering from the higher import costs because of the weak yen. So if this policy actually can bring the yen a bit higher, then there could be a positive impact. So yes, I personally agree with Governor Ueda.
Well, okay, yen aside, we're talking about the rising inflation expectations, and they're setting the path for Japan's monetary policy normalization. Question is, how would you describe what's normal in the eyes of the BOJ?
Right. So in the statement today, there was a very strong message that they will continue raising the rate as long as the inflation and the economic activity stays aligns with their outlook. So yeah, the message is that they will, keep raising the rate. But there's a finding from the weak potential output, which in Japan is really a thing. So after the rate hikes, several hikes, then I think the Bank of Japan will face the fines or will face a ceiling for the hike, any more hikes.
Norihiro, I'd like to pick up your point again on the yen weakness. So what about the global repercussions, especially in terms of the yen movement going forward and its impact on Japanese exporters?
Right. Actually, the positive impact from weak yen was limited for the Japanese exporters because Japanese manufacturers already outsourced or moved their factories outside of Japan in the last 2 decades. So after these moves, the positive impact from the weak yen was small. But in turn, it means that negative impact from the stronger yen were also small. So I think the impact will be limited.
Limited and probably negligible. So the next question is, Japan's pivot to tighten its grip on monetary policy is seen as a sharp contrast to other key major economies. We're talking about the Fed, for example. It is expected to signal a rate cut come September. How do you see the future of the BOJ's policy gap with its counterparts?
Right, that's a great point. And I think that's actually one reason why BOJ is kind of rushing toward the policy normalization. So it's okay for the BOJ if the Fed conducts 1 cut or 2 cuts this year. But after several cuts from the Fed, then the BOJ will face the stronger headwinds against any of additional rate hikes. So I think that these cuts from the Fed will be a headache for the BOJ after the 2 year or so.
Okay, speaking of headaches, with the higher interest rate environment, some people say it is bad news for borrowers, but good news for banks as their margins and also investment income may very well improve. Does the positive outweigh the negative?
At this time, it could be the positive impact could outweigh the negative impact because the level of the interest rate is still low. But at some point, there will be an increasing impact, negative impact, both for the household and the companies. For the household, more than 70% of the household who is borrowing the money for the mortgage is choosing the floating rate instead of the fixed rate. So that will be a headaches. And also same for the corporates. They're very get used to the low interest rate environment, and the higher interest rate will hurt their financial statements. So the impact will be increased ahead.
Fascinating insight. Thank you so much, Norihiro, for breaking it all down for us. Norihiro Yamaguchi of Oxford Economics. China's July activity indicators have suggested that the nation's economy weakened further, and that's although market watchers are expecting a recovery pretty soon following Beijing's recent pledge of more policy support. Factory activity in July went deeper into contraction territory, sinking for the third straight month. Manufacturing PMI came in as expected at 49.4 as compared to June's 49.5. Non-manufacturing PMI, that fell to 50.2 in July from 50.5 in June. And that indicates growth in China's services sector is slowing down. Within the sub-indicators, new export orders for July improved, but remain in contraction. Strong overseas demand has been a bright spot in China's slowing economy, but impending tariffs are driving worries on whether it can be sustained. Meanwhile, growth in China's construction sector slowed, signaling a drop in consumer demand in a once mighty property industry. Domestic consumption has been weighed down by a prolonged real estate crisis. Beijing has recently promised more measures to boost demand and ease pressure on the country's property sector. Analysts are saying that policies will likely aid in recovery in the coming months, but some are doubtful on whether there can be meaningful growth. And that's all I have in business for now, Joe.
We are up to date. Thanks, Liv.
We're up to date.
Coming up on East Asia tonight, we're taking you to Thailand. What's driving the country's push for the production of electric vehicles? Our correspondent, Mei Wong, joins us after the break.
Heading into the second half of 2024, the global economy remains resilient.
You would expect Asian currencies to start to recover.
But there are uncertainties amidst geopolitical tensions.
Unemployment is starting to creep up slowly.
So how should investors navigate? Market insights, optimism and caution in a resilient market. Thursday on CNA.
Brought to you by UOB Privilege Banking.
The ideas, aspirations and attitudes of Singaporeans are changing the nation that raised them.
Passionate Singaporeans living out their very ambitious dreams.
We're looking to write a story of greatness, of extraordinary people impacting communities.
I guess a part of me wanted to connect even deeper with the people.
There's no point playing it safe. Safe will always be forgotten.
If we as Singaporeans are able to have a satellite that we can truly say was conceived, designed, engineered and built in Singapore, wow, how wonderful would it be?
This is Singapore, we don't give up.
Myanmar extends its state of emergency by 6 months as the military government fights rebels on multiple fronts. The government has promised an election next year and says the extended emergency rule will give it more time to put together population data for voter lists. Countries condemned the killing of Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh in an airstrike in Tehran just hours after he attended the new president's inauguration. And the Bank of Japan makes an unexpected move to raise interest rates for the second time in almost 2 decades. Governor Katsuo Ueda gives the assurance that the move will not seriously damage Japan's economy. To Thailand, the country unfazed in its ambitions to become Southeast Asia's electric vehicle manufacturing hub, despite an industry slowdown in other parts of the world like the US. Now, Thailand's Board of Investment, or BOI, has so far already approved 24 projects by car makers that could see more than 500,000 EV units produced a year. In the next 5 years, Thailand BOI expects to see all EV and EV-related investments amounting to more than 200 billion baht or $5.5 billion. CNA's Mei Wong reports.
It's not loud at all.
Below 80 pi.
But for Thailand, this could well be the sweet sound of success. Since coming to power last September, Prime Minister Srettha Thavisin has been steering the country towards the production of electric vehicles.
Thailand is the first country in the region that announced a comprehensive measure, and it is also an aggressive measure to promote the EV industry. And apart from the vehicle production, we also focus on the key parts manufacturing in Thailand.
Thailand has reduced excise tax from 8% to just 2% for electric cars, and EV manufacturers can enjoy up to 40% cuts on import duties for completely built-up units costing not more than 2 million baht or $55,000 per vehicle. These are all moves to drive the country towards a challenging target under the initiative called 30 at 30. Thailand aims to ensure that by the year 2030, at least 30% of its total motor vehicle production will be zero-emission vehicles. That's equivalent to 725,000 cars and 675,000 motorbikes. That's part of the country's goal to progress from being a regional hub for traditional automobile manufacturing to a base for EV production. One of the world's biggest EV players, BYD, is helping to put Thailand on the way. The Chinese manufacturer, which has challenged Tesla's lead in global EV industry, set up its first plant in the country. The facility will start production of EVs in the third quarter of this year and plans to manufacture 150,000 EV units annually. But beyond economic benefits, BYD's investment is seen as another boost to bilateral relations between China and Thailand.
明年是中泰建交50周年，两国关系发展站在新的历史起点上，让我们同舟共济，真诚友好，互帮互助，抓住机遇，战胜挑战，共同建设中泰命运共同体。
The automotive manufacturing sector currently contributes about 10% to Thailand's GDP and employs more than 850,000 people. And taking on EV manufacturing will move the industry into the future. But aside from enticing investors to expand EV manufacturing in the kingdom, the government also wants to encourage Thai citizens to convert to green vehicles.
ตอนที่เราซื้อรถคันนี้มามันก็จะมีรถรัฐบาลช่วยภาษีอยู่ใช่ก็เป็นแรงจูงใจที่ทำให้ซื้ออยู่เหมือนกันข้อแรกเลยนะประหยัดน้ำมันเนี่ยปกติเนี่ยเราเติมน้ำมันเดือนนึงก็ประมาณ 5-6,000 บาทพอเราเปลี่ยนเป็นใช้รถตัว EV ค่าไฟที่บ้านเพิ่มประมาณ1-2,000 บาทอะไรเงี้ยไม่เกินจากนี้ถ้ามีรถ EV เยอะก็ลดมลภาวะได้เยอะครับ
Thailand's capital, Bangkok, is notorious for its noise and air pollution brought about by its traffic congestion. And EVs could go a long way to changing that, as what some Thai automotive manufacturers have already been doing. Battery-operated motorbikes are cheaper, lighter, and quieter. These are just some of the factors attracting buyers. Now, just imagine if this becomes a norm, especially with some 22 million motorbikes on the streets of Thailand today. HSM Motor used to make electric golf carts, but about 4 years ago, it started to produce e-bikes.
ประชากรในกรุงเทพครับเป็นคนต่างจังหวัดเข้ามาอาศัยอยู่เยอะครับฉะนั้นเนี่ยเรื่องค่าครองชีพก็จะเป็นแฟกเตอร์หลักในการที่ดำรงชีวิตอยู่ในกรุงเทพครับการที่ใช้มอเตอร์ไซค์ไฟฟ้าก็จะช่วยในการลดภาระค่าใช้จ่ายให้กับครัวเรือนครับทำให้มีเงินเหลือเก็บมากขึ้นนะครับปัจจุบันถ้าไรเดอร์ครับจะเติมน้ำมันรถน่าจะประมาณ 300-500 บาทครับถ้าเขาเปลี่ยนมาใช้ไฟฟ้าก็จะไม่เกิน100 บาทขั้นต่ำก็คือจะประมาณ 3,000-6,000 บาทต่อเดือนนะครับ
Vietnamese EV maker VinFast is also confident in the potential of Thailand's domestic market. It started operations only in 2017, but it has since expanded its sales to countries as far as the US, Germany, and Australia. And it tells CNA the introduction of VinFast models in the kingdom represents the next step in the company's global expansion strategy after the US and EU markets. Currently, few have heard of VinFast in Thailand, but the company believes its brand will catch on soon enough. In a written reply to CNA, VinFast says it believes Thailand has the most developed EV market in Southeast Asia and possesses strong growth potential. And it adds that VinFast recognizes the competitive landscape in Thailand. However, local consumers are open to new brands, presenting an opportunity for VinFast's entry.
Looking ahead, I'm still very optimistic on the future because we see a good growth that we have seen over the past years. We have seen a lot of commitment and with the tangible result from the car company that they already break ground, for the construction in Thailand.
Much hope is riding on this EV sector to drive the country's economic growth. EVs could also help move the country towards a cleaner future. And the next few years will determine how far Thailand gets in reaching its goals.
You should also know that May will have more on how Thailand's electric vehicle revolution and the up-and-coming names to watch for in this week's CNA correspondent. What's more, May's joining us live now from the streets of Bangkok. May, just out of that gridlock there. First, Thailand's electrification push. Now, it hasn't been smooth, has it? In fact, some analysts say it's even backfired at this point. Is that a fair statement with the job losses we're seeing and local parts producers shutting down?
I would actually say that Thailand's EV market right now is undergoing what you call a speed bump, I would say. So instead of accelerating at maybe at gear 6, it's actually going at about 3 or 4 in terms of the gear right now. Obviously, we have seen some issues, and this is not just a Thai phenomenon in terms of a slowdown in the EV sector. We're talking about a global phenomenon where the demand for EVs has slowed. Now, for one, I would say that, in fact, Thailand has been seeing a rather smooth growth in terms of the EV sector because it has so far managed to attract some $2 billion worth of EV manufacturing as well as EV production projects to date. Another optimistic view is the fact that a lot of people now in Thailand are looking into converting to green vehicles. Give an example, in 2022, you've got about maybe new registrations of battery electric vehicles of about maybe 20,000. But last year in 2023, that number jumped by about 5 times to about 100,000 new battery electric vehicle registrations. So it only goes to show you that it's aside from attracting all the EV makers to Thailand, the consumers too seem to be rather convinced. Obviously, you mentioned there are downsides. The flip side of it is, number one, the economy is not doing very well, and therefore you have a very high household debt ratio right now to the GDP at 91%. That means a lot of bad loans and a lot of people aren't able to pay up loans, and therefore buying a car is really not a priority for them. And yet another point is also the pullout of some of the conventional automakers, for example, Suzuki, for example, Subaru, as well as Honda. Traditionally, they're operating here in Thailand, but Suzuki, Subaru, they have pulled out. Honda is also downsizing in a way. So these are obviously a sign that the market has slowed. Ultimately, the situation is that the Thai authorities as well as the Thai production houses here still believe and still holds a hope for the EV sector because there is still room to grow.
Okay, room to grow. Consumers are happy, but what do you make then of the price war that's going on now, making consumers unhappy, so unhappy, in fact, May, that one manufacturer, BYD, has had to do some damage control. Tell us more.
Indeed, BYD has been under the spotlight for the wrong reasons. For one, they have opened up a new factory here in Thailand, which is a very, very positive thing because they will be actually producing a lot of the EV cars out of the Thailand factory. And the Thailand factory is the very first for BYD in Southeast Asia. But on the other hand, yes, BYD back in April, they actually gave a good discount of about maybe $1,000 for their EV vehicles. However, just about maybe a month ago, they started to produce, or rather they started to give even better discounts of up to about $4,000. Obviously, that really shook the consumers who made a purchase in April and then discovered that in July, early this month, they're actually seeing much bigger discounts. And so they took it up to the Thai authorities. They actually made a consumer complaint, and BYD has stepped forward to negotiate with them. Meaning BYD is actually coming up with measures to counter-propose to them to resolve the problem. They have offered to give cash back to some of these consumers, and also just today they have promised the government that they will give 50,000 of their BYD customers free charging for a 1-year period. That is to help to allay the discontent as well as the anger among some of the consumers. And going forward, they're also saying that they're looking into coming up with more measures and obviously promising the Thai government that they will have a very fair pricing and they will also look at consumer protection more closely. And it's very important here because BYD is one of the leading EV authorizers and EV makers here in Thailand, and also the sales are very, very good. So they need to keep up with their image. They also need to keep up with their consumer in terms of their image for the consumers, because ultimately they want to sell their cars. They want the consumers to trust them. They want the consumers to continue to depend on them. Aside from the image of BYD, it's also about relationship between China and Thailand, because China and Thailand holds very close relationship. In fact, next year, they are celebrating 50 years of diplomatic ties, and both countries have often called each other family. And so this goes beyond business, but it goes also to country relations.
Okay, so Thailand, the Thai government is undeterred. They see the upside in this. So what's the thinking behind them contemplating new incentives to attract hybrid EV makers?
Thailand knows that it can't just put all its eggs into one basket, highly dependent on battery electric vehicles. They have been doing that, and BEVs, as they're called, has actually been a priority from the get-go. However, they have seen how the market has shifted globally as well as in Thailand, and therefore they know they need to diversify, and to do so, they are dishing out even more incentives. As I said earlier, they have already attracted $2 billion worth of investments for the EV sector, and now they intend to do even more because they're not going to let up. So they are looking and obviously judging the scenario and seeing what else they can do to better incentivize the automakers to come to Thailand, better incentivize consumers to switch to EVs for that matter. In fact, you can't see it on camera right now, but I'm actually seeing an EV cab right now over there. So it only goes to show you that it's not just the businesses that Thai government is targeting, but also the consumers as well, because at the end of the day, this is also leading to better air quality for Thailand. Now, remember here that Thailand wants to actually achieve zero carbon emissions in this country at a targeted date, and this is just one way to get to that stage.
Quick question, quick answer, May. Is Thailand on track to be Asia's EV hub?
At the moment, the analysts as well as the industry players are telling me, yes, they are, simply because everything seems to be on the move in terms of the momentum continues. It has slowed, but it is actually going according to plan. And if they continue at this pace or be able to accelerate once the economy picks up, they will be able to achieve that 30 by 30 or 30 at 30 target, which is to make sure that 30% of the vehicles coming out of Thailand will all be green vehicles.
Okay, all right. Thank you so much, May Wong, reporting live from the sides of Bangkok's gridlock there. Coming up on East Asia tonight, CNA's Teresa Tang speaks exclusively to U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken. He's telling us why the U.S. is upgrading its military command structure in Japan, a move described as one of the biggest step up in relations in decades.
It was just a regular cybersecurity Monday. That's me. I'd seen this before. Or had I? What was this AI treachery? I needed some help. Good thing I knew someone. Or something.
Glad you called, Jay. It's time for an upgrade.
Awesome. My path became clear. I knew what I had to do. Because they never stop. No time to waste. This isn't sci-fi. This is precision AI.
Saturday on Japan Hour.
上下線のサービスエリアのコンセプトが異なってまして、場所が高いから地中海みたいな、そういう雰囲気。地域色を取り入れてですね、エリアを展開していけるようにですね、この部署としてもですね、日々いろいろ工夫をしているところです。
久しくコロナでやってなかったコンテストね、ハイウェイ飯。これはご飯ノンストップですね。
Japan Hour, Saturday on CNA. Japan Hour is brought to you by Sumitomo Corporation. MUFG, committed to empowering a brighter future. Zip Air, summer fares are now available. And iChai.
You're watching East Asia Tonight. China says it is displeased with the negative comments Japan made about Beijing during a meeting with the United States. Its foreign ministry lodged a complaint to Japan after officials used the word provocative to label Beijing's behavior in the South and East China Seas, along with its joint military exercises with Russia and the rapid expansion of nuclear weapons arsenal. Liu Jin-song, the Director General of Asian Affairs at the Chinese Foreign Ministry, condemned the quote as false narratives Tokyo made about China and also urged Japan to establish an objective and rational understanding of China and stop making irresponsible remarks about their internal affairs. Japan and the US have convened a line of security discussions from this past Sunday. In both bilateral meetings and joint discussions with foreign ministers from Australia and India, Tokyo and Washington called China the biggest strategic challenge the region faces. Well, CNA's Teresa Tang spoke to Mr. Antony Blinken in an exclusive interview, and he tells us why the U.S. is upgrading its military command structure in Japan, a move that's touted as one of the strongest improvements in their military ties in 70 years.
I think what we're seeing across the board is something that President Biden was determined that we do from day one, and that was to reinvigorate, in some cases even reimagine, but to start by reinvigorating our core alliances and our core partnerships. And we've done that around the world, but particularly we've done that in the Indo-Pacific region. As you mentioned, yes, it's the 18th time I've been to the region, even with everything else that's going on in other parts of the world. Our focus is here because we see our future as an Indo-Pacific country ourselves as very much being with this region. And when it comes to Japan or when it comes to Korea, where we have treaty alliances, we're going to make sure and continue to make sure that they have everything they need to be able to defend their sovereignty, defend themselves against any threats, and that they have the ability to work closely with us. And I think you see Japan that increasingly in recent years is stepping up to its responsibilities in historic ways. But what's so important about each of these alliances is that every single one of them is defensive in nature. There is no design on anyone else's territory. This is all about making sure that, as necessary, we can protect ourselves from threats and, most important, deter them from happening in the first place. So what we're doing with Japan, what we're doing with Korea, is very much what we're doing in different ways with other partners in the region. That's the intent behind it.
I'll be sure to catch the full exclusive interview with the U.S. Secretary of State later on Asia Tonight. That's at 8 p.m. Singapore, Hong Kong time. Well, thanks for joining us for East Asia Tonight this Wednesday. Singapore viewers, stay tuned for highlights from the Paris 2024 Olympics. And don't forget headlines anytime, CNA.Asia it is, plus Facebook, YouTube and also X. Bye-bye.